All right, so we are live. I'm just going to give it another minute till we kick off to allow a couple more people to hop in here. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started here in about a minute. Love that everyone's already using the chat. So feel free to place all of your questions today in the chat, and then we also have the Q&A, and we'll address those as time provides. But really appreciate you all being here today. And as a thank you, we're going to send some coffee or tea, whatever your drink of choice is for joining us. So expect to see those in your inbox here soon. All right. With that, I'm going to get us started today. So thank you all so much for joining us for the Caffeinated Conversations webinar with Presidio and Microsoft, featuring Azure VMware Solution this afternoon. We'd like to thank Microsoft for sponsoring this event, and we're looking forward to a great session. To begin, as some basic housekeeping items, please remember to use the chat tool or the Q&A tool to ask any questions to our speakers, and we'll address these questions as time provides throughout the presentation and at the end of the event today. Additionally, the session is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording following the session. Lastly, as I mentioned before, as a thank you for joining us, you'll be receiving a digital coffee gift card voucher that you can use if you want to order a hot drink during the session. With those small housekeeping items, let's get started. So we can go to the next slide, please. And I'd like to begin today's session by introducing our amazing speakers we have. So first off, we have Madeline Tomczyk. Madeline is a part of the Microsoft Alliance team here at Presidio, focusing on state and local government. Additionally, Will Mason is a senior Microsoft Solutions engineer here at Presidio. We also have Guillermo Rodriguez, who is a senior solutions architect at Presidio. And last but not least, we have Hussam Halal, who is a senior partner solutions architect at Microsoft. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Madeline, I'll pass it off to you to get us started.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our caffeinated conversation. I hope you all have some coffee with you. I know I do, to get us started. So to go over today what we're going to discuss, we're going to talk a little bit about our partnership with Microsoft, and then we're going to go into what AVS really is, so you can kind of have understanding, and then how that beginning of Presidio migration really starts, so you can kind of see how that goes, and implementation of that. And then we're going to show you an actual lab. It's a live lab, so you're going to get to see how the migration actually happens, what's coming up next, and then there's going to be a Q&A. As McKenna said, we're going to have questions. You have questions throughout the whole thing, drop them in the chat. We'll get to them as we can, but we'll certainly have a dedicated period of time just for question and answers. But go ahead. The chat is, we're going as we're going. So go ahead and drop them in there if you have any questions. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the partnership, what happens with, between Microsoft and Presidio. So as McKenna said, my role here at Presidio is just to focus on the Microsoft Alliance with Microsoft and how our relationship goes. I focus solely on state and local government and education, but there are other people on my team who do that. But to kind of, we only have these roles because that relationship is so strong with Microsoft. You can see here we have different certifications. We have the Azure Fundamentals, which is always, a good one to have. So you have your basics of that. But we also, I think the big one here is we're the #1 AVS partner and we were the first one to have an advanced specialization. In the bottom left, you see we have some designations and specializations that are, that we get from Microsoft for the things that we do. But again, you can see right there, Azure VMware Solution. We know what we're talking about. We've done this plenty of times within Microsoft and with Microsoft accounts. So we definitely know how to go to them and make sure that we're working with them and the client to make sure we're getting what's best for them. And a big part of this, our relationship, is funding. We can get funding from Microsoft to help you do that transition, to make you make that move into AVS. We've been able to secure a lot of money in funding. You can see there it's a couple $1 million worth of funding just to try and make sure that we can help our customers get there. So If you see this as a good solution for you, certainly let us know. We'll make sure we get hooked up with Microsoft and get you some funding. So on the next slide, you're probably wondering, if you don't already know, what is AVS? What is the Azure VMware Solution, right? So we're just going to give you a quick little overview of that so you can kind of see what that is to go into the next thing. So in the next slide, you're going to see that there's a couple myths around AVS, right? People have okay, well, if I'm running my VMware in Azure, it's going to be too complicated. I don't want to spend more money. I don't want to have to pay, double for VMware and Azure and Microsoft licenses and Azure. What happens with security? Like, is everything going to be okay? What happens if I can't have, a large downtime that I can't get to because my migration's happening. Things needs to happen all the time. So these are a couple of the myths that probably you've heard or have thought yourself about AVS. And if anybody on the other speakers want to jump in here, totally fine. But if you see this throughout the presentation, if you're like, hey, you didn't bring up about being complicated or you bring up expenses, which we will, drop them in the chat so we can keep them going as we go. And then to kind of go a little bit as to AVS, we'll go to the next slide. So you have your on-premise data center. You got all the stuff in there, you know what's needing, but how do we move that into Azure? So it's a easy button, right? This is the easiest way to do it with the AVS solution because you just migrate. It's a lift and shift, and you don't have to take what you already know about VMware and all the resources and all the knowledge that you have and throw that away, because we're just going to take all that information and drop it into the cloud, use Microsoft's background with this great cloud that knows what they've met all their different kind of standards behind it, and go and use advantage of that. And not only do you get that private cloud, you now have all these services that go with it. So you're going to be able to use Azure Security, you're going to be able to use Data Lake, Lab, all of that, because now you're getting all these additional benefits of Azure. So very simply put, it's just you're taking one spot and putting it into another spot, right? And it's very easy, and it takes a lot of the pressure off of you. But again, we kind of brought up, hey, I've heard this is really expensive. How do we get around this? So on the next slide, you're going to see, if you have your on-prem solution, you have all these different things you have to pay for, right? Yeah, you have your management, your application, your operating system, the typical stuff. But now you have to worry about, hey, is my stuff going to be secure? Do I have to worry about the people inside the facility? What happens with power and cooling? Hey, I live outside of DC. We've had some crazy weather lately. Things go down, right? How do you make sure? Now I have to keep track of my data center to make sure that the electricity going out didn't knock out my data center. Well, if you move that into Azure, well, now all you have to worry about is the management application and operating system, because all that other stuff is taken on by Microsoft. They have that. You only have to worry about those three things at the top in green. Azure manages the rest. So there's a lot of pieces of just all of that difference in price. Look at the difference there. And if you have all that resources that you've been allocating towards your data center, and now you put that into Azure, now you have those resources freed up, either from a financial standpoint to go buy things that the resources that you do need, or some of those technical people can be put on projects that are super, fun and kind of sexy, like AI and stuff like that. So you're able to go and put your resources into better value for your organization. And again, it's an easy button that can take you from one to the other. So on the next slide, I'm going to actually pass it off to Guillermo. He's going to talk a little bit about the use cases behind the Azure AVS solution.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, my name is Guillermo Rodriguez, and what we're going to go over here right now are just some of the main use cases of where AVS makes sense for customers. So if we're going to go ahead and start that off with our first use case, which is going to be application modernization. And let's see if we can advance that. There we go. So application modernization is effectively, what's your 3 to 5 year plan? Are you currently on-premises VMware today? Are you looking to start modernizing your environment and moving it into the cloud? And this is, I think, one of the centerpieces of using AVS, because it is an amazing stepping stone to start integrating native services into your existing environment. Typically in the past, when customers have done a modernization effort, they try to, as I like to say, eat the whole elephant. You try to take the entire application, the entire environment, you start modernizing it, moving it into native services, and sometimes that becomes really time consuming, very costly, and it just doesn't work out. And if you try to do it gradually, sometimes that extra latency between the on-premises environment and the cloud environment starts to throw up roadblocks to it. So starting off your transformation with a migration into AVS gives you that adjacency to all of those native components. So it really lets you take that elephant and eat it one bite at a time as you start to modernize and hybridize that environment by introducing all of the different native services. So, that's a good choice there, but sometimes it might not be in the cards today to start, looking towards a cloud native solution. That's where we move on into cloud migrations. There might be other triggering events where AVS starts to make more sense. For example, you have an infrastructure refresh. We've seen what the cost and what inflation is doing to some of the hardware components today. The associated costs with maintaining and running a data center may no longer be where your business wants to focus its time and manpower, but on the things that actually differentiate what you do, which is focusing that on your products and services and how you interact with your customers. So, it's a great choice to use and leverage with all the different things that we've shown so far about simplifying your management and refocusing your efforts on what makes you a differentiator in your industry. Furthermore, we move on to the data center extension. That's going to give you the ability to have an area to quickly expand and bring down infrastructure as needed for projects. Maybe you have a massive development effort that needs that extra compute, and you want to go ahead and light that up and use that in AVS. You might have a environment that runs on a seasonal basis, and paying for all of that infrastructure year round when you're only active for a few months out of the year just doesn't make a lot of sense. So having the ability to just land and expand very quickly and then collapse that back down once that need is gone makes a lot of financial sense. Also, as COVID taught many of us, being able to stand up a cloud virtual desktop environment is a huge benefit, especially if, again, you've got those types of seasonal needs and you need to just quickly get an environment up and running so that your remote users or your, as I like to say, a surprise workforce shows up. You need to have an ability to get them in and logged in and connected to your services. In some cases, you've already have some built out environments that are in Azure native, and you want those desktops to have that adjacency to really quickly access and have a very low latency connection. Last but not least, and definitely not least, is disaster recovery. This is a very strong use case that we use a lot of the times, where customers are just looking for a quick, no hassle disaster recovery environment. Big benefits, of course, is it's like for like. You're not standing up or transforming your virtual machines. You are replicating your virtual machines into another vSphere environment. And you can approach this with many of the existing tools that you use today. So almost all of the major backup and disaster recovery vendors are already using Azure native and have plugins for the storage and infrastructure. You have the ability to use Zerto if that's something that you're currently using. There's also Jetstream software, which allows you to very easily start off with a pilot light environment and expand the environment as necessary, which makes controlling costs when you're not testing or actively in a declaration for your disaster recovery environment. So all of these are very, very strong use cases that really make AVS make a lot of sense, not just for ease of use and leveraging the investment you've already made in your workforce in understanding and learning and operating vSphere, but just some of the financial aspects of it too. And I'll pause if there's any questions on any of that. If not, we'll just go ahead and move on. So a couple things to keep in mind here is, what does an engagement look like when you're working with Presidio, and how do you prepare to start investigating whether or not AVS is going to make sense for you? So you're going to meet with your account team. You're going to meet with people like myself, and a couple of high-level things that you're going to want to look at is, who is going to be the main people sitting at the table in your organization that need to speak. From experience, it's not just the IT director. Sometimes you got to make sure, do you have security present? They're going to have a say in what this environment looks like and how it works. You definitely don't want to be in a situation where you start a migration process and then security steps in and says, we haven't had a discussion. We need to circle back and start over. Another important piece on this is to do a little bit of homework before you come in. Yes, you can lift and shift your entire environment. I don't recommend doing that only because not every workload is going to make sense. There are use cases and requirements where some of your workloads may need to remain on premises because of what they support, what they're operating or managing. Examples of this would be Cisco call centers or building automation components, camera systems. Things of that nature just don't make sense to migrate those into the cloud if they just require that on-prem environment to function properly. So by homework, I mean take a good look at your environment and make sure that you've assessed which environments would be migrating, because that's going to make sure that you get a very tight and well put together cost analysis of what this environment might look like, as well as the services required to migrate them. And this is going to, take into account other things like networking, what your on-premises networking requirements are versus via the firewall, via load balancing, and things of that nature. All of those need to be taken into account. So making sure that you have the necessary parties at the table is going to be really, really important to make sure that we have everything we need there. All right, and moving along, and really it starts with an RV Tools. I think RV Tools is probably one of the easiest ways to start that conversation. It gives a full inventory. Other methods of doing this also would be a live optics. RV Tools is a great snapshot. Live optics gives you a little more of a running tally of utilization, which can also be very useful. But this is a great tool to get a good holistic view of your environment. Be able to pare things down, plan things out for what should or should not be included for disaster recovery purposes. All of these are really good for that purpose. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this back over to Madeline. We'll talk a little bit about the AVS node sizes.
You can, oh, sorry, forgot my mic. So you can see here that there's some different sizes that we have when it comes to AVS. And then you need to be able to, and anybody else on our team to jump in on this one as well. So you can see that there's the CPU against the data lake itself. So Cascade Lake itself. So these are the things that can kind of help you figure out where you need to go. Typically, we do about 3 nodes when it comes to an AVS solution. So that kind of helps to give you some background a little bit as well to where we're going and in terms of that networking.
Yeah, and I would say one of the big things to really point out here on this slide is, to call back to the old Mythbuster slide, is yes. AVS is dedicated hardware for your environment. This is not a multi-tenant solution. What you see on this screen are the different flavors of the hardware that are dedicated for your ESXi hosts. And based on your workload needs and requirements are how we would size and position these different platforms for you. So you're getting all of the horsepower on all of these boxes dedicated to your environment. And moving on to the next slide, we can go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the storage options that we have available. Now, it's very common in the past when VMware started getting into the different cloud vendors, it is still a hyper-converged solution. And that came with a lot of benefits. vSAN is very powerful. It's highly performant. But if you have an environment that is storage imbalanced, and by that I mean it is an environment that just has way more storage than the individual nodes can provide, are providing the compute, you end up needing to add or grow your environment just to satisfy the storage requirement, and now you have idle compute and the CPU and memory is just languishing. You don't need to do that anymore. Azure has presented a myriad of options that allows you to right-size these environments and offload that storage, if necessary, to different types of storage solutions. First and foremost, we have Azure Elastic SAN. If we can go back, please. Azure Elastic SAN, and that is it's a great solution that allows you to present a data store to your AVS environment, and you can actually run the virtual machines off of that. If you have on-premises investments in other vendors, such as Pure or NetApp, we have the ability to stand up Pure Cloud Block Store or Azure NetApp Files and use that for your environment as well. So we don't have to completely take what you've invested storage-wise on-prem with those solutions, and we can integrate it into the overall architecture of what we propose for the environment. And furthermore, we talked about the stepping stone and starting to integrate Azure native solutions into these. And that is where you can start using Azure Blob Storage and Azure Files. A lot of the times when we start looking at these storage imbalances, what we see right off the bat is, wow, we have a huge file server and nobody ever wants to delete or throw away anything. They want to keep it forever. So, you have the ability to, instead of using your very fast vSAN storage to host a file server, you can offload that into Azure Files. If you have storage requirements that are mandated via a compliance regime, that you have to keep it for a certain amount, Azure Blob Storage or cold storage is a very cost-effective way of holding on those infrequently, if ever, accessed data files so that you don't have to host that on vSAN, and really just take a little more of a balanced approach when you work on this. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Hussam Halal, and we're going to talk a little bit about landing zones.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Hussam from Microsoft. Thank you, Guillermo and Madeline, for the presenting the previous slides. Now, I also like how Presidio kind of landed their landing zones with their customer, meeting them wherever they are. Like basically have three levels. One is the baseline environment, basically meeting the small needs for small customers, and then also like the large scale enterprise for new Azure customers, and eventually the brownfield if the customer is already have existing Azure presence and want to add AVS on top of that. What I will do now is kind of dive a little bit deeper in each of these to kind of give you an understanding what Presidio will offer you at these different landing zones. But before doing that, I also want to mention one thing here. We also have the Azure VMware Solution Landing Zone Accelerator. That's kind of, basically similar to these landing zone environments, and it's kind of documented. You have the kind of the principles or the kind of the design guides for it, and also you have the automation if you want to deploy these in Terraform or ARM, Bicep, etc. So these are a good starting point for customers who also wants to start their AVS migration journey into Azure. So with that, let's kind of dive in more and talk about what's the Azure baseline environment looks like if you want to deploy that in your environment. So this kind of slide summarizes what the customer will have if they would deploy the Azure baseline for AVS. In this slide, you would see there's 3 subscriptions, one for AVS, one for connectivity, and one for shared services like Active Directory, private endpoint to like other Azure services like storage, so the connectivity can stay private within Azure environment, doesn't traverse the internet, and then also like other services that the customer might use within the Azure service like application gateway, etc. And what also this baseline has, it kind of accommodates all the levels of connectivity that the customer wants to have to connect their maybe on-prem environment into AVS, or connecting their Azure Virtual Network to AVS, and also their possibly Azure Virtual WAN Hub to AVS as well. So if you follow me with the colors there, you can see on the left side, the green color represents kind of IPsec or VPN connectivity from on-prem into Azure Virtual Hub. And if you follow from the bottom side as well, if you see the brown line, that's basically how you can connect through ExpressRoute from on-premises data center into Azure Virtual WAN. And then to connect AVS eventually to these environments, that's where you can also terminate that line in the middle that connects the AVS to a virtual WAN hub. Keep in mind that the way that AVS today kind of deployed inside of Azure, it's kind of deployed in an island. And the way it actually connects to the other environments is through an internal ExpressRoute service that comes out of no charge. It's kind of free to customers. And that's how we allow AVS to connect to other places. So to connect that to the virtual WAN hub, we leverage an ExpressRoute connection to establish the connectivity between AVS and the other locations. Other locations could be, as I mentioned, on-prem through VPN or ExpressRoute, could be Azure Virtual Network, also through like VNet peering. That's kind of the red line that you see there on the screen, or could be also global reach if you want to connect directly from AVS to on-prem without using like services like V1 Hub, etc. But that actually would require the customer to have ExpressRoute connectivity to Azure. So if the customer have ExpressRoute connectivity to Azure, they can also use global reach, and that will be probably the most optimal solution if they want to get the maximum performance out of all these options. So this is kind of a little view of what the baseline, architecture looks like for like AVS landing zone. Now, in the next slide, I'm gonna go a little bit more deeper and talk about the large-scale enterprise landing zone. This is kind of the one that works for enterprise customers who have various needs, and it also comply with a lot of principles that we have in the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework, CAF, if you're familiar with that. And it actually, I like to call this kind of future-proof architecture because the way it's designed, it's kind of avoiding all the limits that you might hit with the services and how they're set up. So you can have multiple AVS private clouds, and those can be in one subscription. Then you might have a subscription for like connectivity, a subscription for shared services like Active Directory and whatsoever, and then you might have a subscription for like specific application workloads, etc. So the way that's kind of landed, it's really scalable, and it kind of meets the customer needs even in the future. Like if they start small today and then they want to grow in the future, this is really the way to go with their deployment. Right, let's move to the other slide. And now let's kind of talk a little bit more about the connectivity of Azure VMware Solution. So as I mentioned in the baseline slide, we talked about virtual WAN hub. This is basically the most scalable way when you kind of connect AVS to other locations, to your on-prem environment or to your Azure Virtual Network, etc. It can handle all kind of connectivity, ExpressRoute, VPN, IPsec, etc. It's scalable. Again, and you can even deploy a firewall or enable an Azure firewall or even third-party firewalls on that virtual WAN. And when we do that, we code it like a secure virtual WAN. And then it also can mesh with multiple hubs if you are deploying multiple hubs, and you can connect them in different regions, and you can have kind of multi-regional connectivity if you want to have that. So it's a scalable, manageable, and allowing for expansion in the future. The other option, let's say for smaller like environments, or if the customer just want to like basically have a small like proof of concept environment, and or maybe already investing in virtual networks and like some firewalls that already have deployed today in their virtual networks, they can use the the capability of Azure network gateways to connect to AVS and also to connect to on-prem. And they can also deploy a route server there. What the route server would help them to do is, let's say the on-prem connectivity is VPN and connectivity to AVS is ExpressRoute. The route server, when you enable like a feature called branch to branch, it will allow the facility of exchanging routes between those two connectivity. So it's really kind of a BGP appliance that lives there, allows the interchange of routes so the two different connectivity can talk to each other. And also it can, what it does as well from a routing perspective with AVS, if you have like an NVA that's capable of talking BGP, it allows to advertise those routes back to AVS. So if you have a firewall there and want to attract all the internet traffic to come to this firewall before it leaves the Azure to the internet, then you can use route server to advertise those BGP routes back to AVS. This way, AVS knows where to send the internet traffic eventually to the routers. So these kind of the two options that we want to talk about from connectivity and how you can connect AVS to on-prem through various if you're using V1 Hub or you're using the Azure Virtual Network. If we move on to the next slide, please. This is basically more focused on how you would connect to the internet, right? So as I mentioned in the previous slides, you eventually in real production environment, you would have some sort of firewalls, right? And those firewalls can be at different locations, can be in a virtual network if you have that today, can be enabled in a virtual WAN hub, and that's what we call secure hub, and also can be deployed within AVS as a virtual appliances as well. That's kind of if the customer wants to handle the connectivity or the firewall inspection within the AVS environment. So there is some architectures that we support where you can deploy the firewall there, and that could be Palo Alto with Panorama, could be FortiGate with FortiManager, et cetera, et cetera. Also, you can leverage some even basic some firewall features within NSX, which comes out of the box with AVS for free, like the disputed firewalls. You can be also leveraged inside of AVS to kind of, guide traffic in certain patterns and avoid, traffic to go different routes, etc. So this is also available for you if you want to use for free within AVS. So all these are great firewall options that you can use, as I mentioned, in different locations. So it kind of meets you wherever your needs are. Let's move to next slide. Okay, so I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Will, who's going to walk you through the next slides and also show you the very exciting demo. Will?
Hello, all. My name's Will Mason, Senior VMware Cloud Engineer with Presidio. So the next round of slides, we've talked about the processes leading up to the implementation. We've talked about how, from a pre-sale standpoint, you guys would be working with the account manager and the solutions architect, and depending on the complexity of your needs, multiple solutions architects to really ensure that we've got good data to give you a good design. And assuming all of that falls into place, we get to the implementation stage. So once we get to the implementation stage, you are going to be engaged with a project manager who ensures they manage the project, meet all the statements of work, timelines, and manage communication amongst all the project members. An Azure architect, essentially the large technical project manager. They will work with all the other engineers across the project and ensure that there is a smooth rollout of resources. And in the event that there is a problem or a concern, the Azure architect is the first line escalation for trying to really figure out what a problem is or what a solution that may or may not need to be retooled or redesigned. An implementation engineer who will handle the implementation of all constructs and components, and then a migration engineer whose sole job is to work within the scope of HCX to assist with or handle your migrations, assuming they've been broken up in waves, and there's a whole slew of planning meetings that happen during the engagement where we go over and plan how we're going to deploy the AVS and deploy the infrastructure, what groups or waves, your workloads that need to go into Azure, how they're going to be broken up. And standing up the landing zone and firewall, we've got a multitude of options. Generally, we see the most amount of success where it is a mix of infrastructure as code and There is some manual through the portal, component customization. A lot of this stuff can be very complicated, and trying to have as a full infrastructure as code, just Terraform create, and then 12 hours later, it's all there. So you're going to see a mix. I don't normally recommend these projects as a going to your org and saying, guess what? This is the project that we are going to fully adopt an infrastructure as code methodology and everything forward as IaaS. These projects are really good for setting a good standard base for your Azure presence. And from there, they can act as a launch pad for future infrastructure as code projects and direction. For example, modernization of the workloads once they've gotten up there is a prime example of how you can really start that true conversion to an infrastructure as code mindset. Firewall implementations can be infrastructure as code. It really depends on the complexity of the architecture. We see a range between what is now considered kind of old school, which is the load balancer sandwich model, effectively two appliances sandwiched between an external and an internal Azure load balancer. For many years, that was kind of the standard for third-party firewall options. Nowadays, within the last year and a quarter, we are seeing the emergence of third-party integrated firewalls on the Azure vWAN hub. So for example, Palo Alto's next generation firewall, FortiGate has a product there as well. Cisco has a product there as well. There's a lot of integrated connectivity from a third-party standpoint going on the vWAN hub that just used to not be there 2 years ago. It should go without saying, but quite honestly, all of these components throughout the implementation stage, we are in a constant state of testing and validation. We do it for two reasons. A, as part of our project before handoff, we're going through and testing and validating everything to ensure that it meets your expectations. And at the same time, we've all been there where one minor change to something that worked 2 days ago now has broken a lot of other things. So in an effort to minimize problems throughout the project, we're constantly checking and validating. So the AVS stand-up. So as Hussam said a few minutes ago, there is the Azure VMware Solution Landing Zone Accelerator. Now, there are a lot of components within Azure that you can just spin up as you need. If you want to spin up Platform SQL, you have the ability to do that. If you want to spin up an app gateway, you have the ability to do that. Within reason, you can do the same thing with VMs. A product like the Azure VMware Solution, you have to do what's called a request for quota. And quota is going to be based off of your subscription or your master services contract. You will put in a request with Microsoft requesting quota or permission to deploy out your Azure VMware Solution. That will consist of a request of at minimum 3 nodes. And actually, there's a hyperlink online that will give you step-by-step on how to request quota. Once that quota request has been approved, you can go through the process of deploying via the Azure VMware Solution Landing Zone Accelerator. You can go through the process of deploying it out. And once it is done after 4 to 6 hours, you will be in a position to start the integration. And this underscores one of the areas where I talk about, like, this is manual in the portal integration versus an IAC push, because we've got to do things like connect the express route into the vWAN hub or virtual network gateway. We have to end up doing some DNS configuration on the AVS. There's a lot of little check boxes and pieces as part of the process that we have to go through that just don't lend themselves to an infrastructure as code approach. One question that comes up a lot is there vCenter access from the portal, Azure portal? And there is not. There is no direct access to vCenter. That being said, with the introduction and use of other tools, leveraging Azure Arc, there is some management in certain regions that you can do for workloads on your vCenter, but generally there is no typing in the vCenter IP address from the Azure portal. So HCX implementation. This is done in concert with your VMware admins on-prem, because what this does is it enables appliances that are resident within the AVS, and then we work with you guys to deploy these another set of appliances within your on-premise vCenter. And once these appliances are up, they get tied together, and this allows for a secure connection that sits within whatever your on-premise connectivity between these two sites. So for example, when we are migrating, let's say we're doing a bulk migration. So that data is encrypted between the two appliances as it gets copied from your on-premise environment up to the AVS. We see the most success in these projects when they are done as a re-IP bulk migration. We do have the capability to do a layer 2 span between your two sites, and there are some other options that that we can use to migrate virtual machines up via HCX. If you guys want to have an extended conversation about that, please feel free to reach out and we can have a more customized discussion specifically for your needs. Migrations. So as part of, and this kind of reiterates my statement of we're constantly validating and revalidating the connectivity and configuration of all the things that we implement. After we've implemented HCX, we will do an alpha, which tests the configuration and function of the HCX implementation. Generally is just a test VM, whether it's a creation of one of your existing VM templates, or whether it is a random virtual machine that has no use to the infrastructure. You're going to delete it anyway. Let's just play around and use it to test. And then we have a beta test, which consists of virtual machines that, again, are not very important to the organization, or they can just be virtual machines that were multiple virtual machines that were stood up from the organization's template. And we use that to kind of to do connectivity, speed, and testing and get a baseline. Because one of the biggest questions that comes out of all of these discussions is how fast can we move the virtual machines? And while there's a lot of things we can do to optimize the behavior of HCX, and a lot of things we can do to optimize the behavior of our IPsec tunnels, or what type of express route, honestly, all of it really comes down to physics. So when we talk about speeds and feeds going to the cloud, it's going to be what you choose is going to have to be kind of the intersection of what you want to, what you're expecting to pay for, and the speed with the amount of data we need to move. So I tend to recommend at minimum 1 gig in terms of express route. I have seen customers go anywhere from 500 meg all the way up to 20 gig. So it runs in, especially in conjunction with a vWAN hub, the ability to scale up and if need be scale down those kind of speeds really assists in doing some cost control measures. For example, speeding up or having a fast set express route at the beginning so that you can move your data as much as possible, and then turning around and maybe recommissioning a new express route at a slightly lower speed because you've moved all the data you need to, and the rest of your org doesn't necessarily need a 20 gig express route going to the cloud. Maybe they only need a 5 gig. So at this point, we're going into the lab show off. So what I am about to show you, we've talked about what goes in, what the ingredients for these are. I think what I want to do is we're going to start off with HCX. I'm going to show you, because at the end of the day, this is really what you guys want to see. Everything leads up to what I'm about to show you, not just from the we're actually moving the workloads, but also, you know, when you get to this point in your project, this is where I see most customers start to really get confident and get excited about the migration of their workloads to the cloud. For those that are in the management realm, this is a great point in which you can really illustrate that success is right around the corner for doing that. So let me go here. So I will fill in the blanks in a minute. But what I'm going to start off and show you right now is this is HCX. This is what the dashboard looks like. When you go to do your migrations in Azure to the AVS, this is where you're going to go. What I've got here is I've got a webinar group. It's 4 workloads, approximately 300 gig. And I've had these running for a couple days now. And then I've got this one right here that is in a draft status. So before I kick it off, let me just go ahead and show you. When we create a bulk migration within HCX, it's going to allow us to not just add virtual machines, but as part of the process of adding the virtual machines, this is how we build our waves. We're going to be able to specify what the destination cluster is, the destination data center are. In my case, I don't have any third-party storage at the moment, but the vSAN data store. And disk format, because this is a vSAN product, should always be thin provisioned. And let's go. You know it's doing this because I'm live. So while that's pulling up, here. So this is my on-premise vCenter. So we're just going to go from this direction. One of the things I've got set up, and you guys can do this at home. So as part of this illustration, I've got a web server, an IIS server just sitting. This is my on-premise address. And I was going to show it later, but I've got let's see for when it comes up.
Well, you can try the :443 if you know the IP of the appliance. That might give you a faster response. Just do the IP and then :443.
10.1.6.180. So this is the HCX dashboard. We've got a site pairing, which is a linkage between my Azure VMware Solution in Central US and my on-premise lab that is in Orlando. These are our current, as I was just in that screen. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is my IIS test box. And I really want to, what I want to show you guys is this is how we're building these migration groups so that it makes it so much easier to move these things via HCX. It literally comes down to, let's go ahead and select VMs for migration. Here, we've got our global settings in which I've selected bulk migration. And I've told this job when I expect it to migrate. Told it on the 30th, but I'm going to show you, we do this in Presidio as a safety mechanism. We will schedule our bulk migrations for sometimes months in advance because we prefer to have it running and seeding and making sure that there's constant changes that are being replicated up. And then when it comes to the actual migration window, we can more actively come in and say, just migrate right now. And I'm about to show you guys that in a second. So I've got, because I want this to run, and because I've told it, you know, honestly, you're not going to migrate until like 20 days from now. We're using the enable seed checkpoint. And again, that means any changes that are done to your on-premise workload, this is an IIS server, but pretend it's a file server. Maybe somebody adds a couple more files, makes changes to existing files. Doing it this way, especially having seed checkpoints, ensures that any changes that are made to the virtual machine are automatically copied over. And then right before you do the actual migration, it's also going to do another final delta of all the changes. I've specified where it's going to go. And then if we look down here, I've even specified what IP address in my new environment that I want it to be. I want it to be at 10.20.10.200, and this is my data. So let me save and validate this. And now we're going to click go. So what's happening is HCX is gearing up and it's going to start scanning the virtual machines. And it's going to create and do what's called a base sync. And in the case of here, this is an individual virtual machine. But one thing I'd like to underscore is that this process of synchronization, it is not one at a time. It is all at the same time. So for example, when I kicked these off, they were all sending data at the same time. And right now I'm going to go through and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to migrate them. So you saw earlier on the job where I told it migrate sometime in the 30th. This one is kind of no different. I've already got it set to migrate sometime on the 30th. But again, sometimes things change. Sometimes schedules, stuff just happens. Stuff gets canceled. So maybe you have to push. It is a lot easier to come in and change this piece, or especially if this piece is very far forward in the future, it's a lot easier to not even have to worry about rescheduling at the HCX level, your migration. And the whole time, seed checkpoints will continue to ensure that there are changes being replicated up. So when we do it on the Presidio side, when we want to do the actual migration, whether it's individually or as I'm doing with a group, ignore failover window and start the migration as soon as possible. So we're going to go ahead and start doing that. And while that's happening, let's go check the status of our virtual machine. It's gearing up. These on average take about, I've seen them take the slimmest amount of time is 10 minutes. On average, I usually expect about 15 minutes. Honestly, if there's a lot of data change ahead of time, that can grow to a much, much larger window. But for situations like here, this is not going to be a very long process. Now, while all of that is happening, a couple of things we're going to see on the VMware side. So We've gone into switchover started. Let's go into our virtual machines. Because what's going to happen, and one thing I want to underscore on this is HCX does not delete data. HCX copies data. So even though these workloads have had their data, like we're going to migrate these to the AVS, these virtual machines will still exist on this vCenter in the original condition they were at the time of power off. So while we have a multitude of automated options that we can use if we need to fail back to on-prem, the old tried and true, if everything else fails method is usually as easy as delete the virtual machine that was migrated to the AVS and then repower on this one. It will do a slight change to the name within vCenter. It will not change the name at the OS level. But other than that, these VMs will still exist. And in fact, as part of our projects, we usually recommend towards the end having kind of a recycling or garbage bin kind of time of going through and doing the delete from disk to make sure that the storage on-prem is optimized if it needs to be. And eventually these are going to shut off. Did my other screen come up? No. So while that's all going on, let's go ahead and talk about some of the constructs and some of the Azure native pieces. So as we showed you in the documentation, you have the ability to connect through Virtual Network Gateway or through vWAN Hub. In my lab here, we go through vWAN Hub. We have a vWAN Hub. And in fact, because a vWAN Hub is capable of doing both express route and IPsec tunnel, we even have IPsec tunnels to the AVS itself from my house. So here is what the vWAN Hub looks like. It is capable of doing express route and site-to-site VPN. It is also capable of doing user VPN. So you could also use this, and in the case of our lab, we use it as this as well, as a means of doing an individual, VPN connection. So maybe you guys want to migrate off of a more expensive VPN option. vWAN hubs in connection with the Azure VPN client can give you the ability to migrate off of a third-party VPN solution and still have things like always-on connectivity and MFA connectivity all built into Azure. So these are all of our IPsec tunnels. This is the express route from the Azure VMware Solution. And this is how we tie it in to the vWAN Hub right there. Now, in terms of performance, because it has the ability to scale versus tied up into a SKU with a virtual network gateway, we can go in, and currently I've got this set at a pretty low performance because there is the intersection of cost and performance with this. But if I need to scale it up, like right now, I've got it as a 3 gig router. If I need to scale it up all the way to 50 gig, I can. And that ensures that whatever the connectivity that I need to my AVS, which is coming from the express route. So let's say I want to ensure that I've got 10 gig going to the AVS. And then maybe I've got my IPsec tunnel or some of these other components. Here we go. This is where we scale it out. Like this allows me to dynamically scale up the performance of it. It does come with a requirement of time. It generally takes about 30 minutes for these changes to commit, but it is also 30 minutes in which there is no impact to your current production. All workloads and all components communicate. Now, what do we do about Azure native components? So we have the ability to do an association or peering into the vWAN hub. And those associations serve two purposes. A, they are the ability to link your existing or projected future Azure workloads and VNets into this solution. And B, one of the things that comes up in these projects, I like to call them mom projects, because we want to migrate to the cloud. And once we've migrated our workloads to the cloud, we want to optimize them for living in the cloud. And that optimization can be honestly, it can be as simple as just right sizing for the AVS. But generally, when we talk about that kind of cloud optimization, we're talking about placing it behind things like App Gateway or Azure Front Door. Things that are going to allow Microsoft and your cloud presence to be fronted by some of the newer methods of managing and handling your infrastructure. And once you've done that, it all leaves you in a position to be able to modernize these workloads. Because while there may be workloads that will always have to stay in a VMDK form, this process gives you the ability and puts you in a situation, in a position in which maybe you want to just start modernizing and converting some of your apps to Azure App Services or AKS. Maybe you've got certain components that you want to convert into functions. Whatever you end up doing for your modernization strategy, you're going to place it behind cloud-based delivery constructs. Here's an example of one that we've got going on right now. I've got an app gateway as a test, and that IIS server that we're in the midst of migrating back, I've got an app gateway with a WAF on the front end. So when I hit it from port 80, it's automatically sending that traffic on-prem via this backend pool. And once we've migrated that IIS server, once HCX has migrated the IIS server, instead of being at 10.1.12.121, it's going to automatically reroute traffic to 10.20.10.200. And the cool part about this is this is the optimization piece. But when you start talking about your modernization, it can be as easy as maybe you don't stand up the AVS-based servers just yet, but you still want to do some dev tests connecting. You still want to have your app service in the mix. You can now structure it to where your app services can nicely transition behind an app gateway or a front door versus having what we would all consider a hard swing of having to redirect DNS and having to do a lot of other things in the back end. And if something goes wrong, your ability to revert is going to be measured in sometimes 30 minutes to an hour, whereas something like this, it's measured in seconds. So let's go check the status of our HCX migration. So first, I'm going to check on my virtual machines. And if you look here, these are the 4 test virtual machines that I had already running. So in the time that I've been talking, HCX has shut them down, and it has moved them to this folder that says migrated to the cloud. You'll notice that it's renamed it at the VMware level, but there is no change at the operating system level and the under the hood of the VMDK. For all intents and purposes, irrespective, accepting ramifications for things like Active Directory and duplicate SIDs and all kind of craziness. For all intents and purposes, I still can have the ability, in certain circumstances, to power these back on if I need to. Now, let's go check. It may still be working on my IIS box. So let's go look and see what the status of my IIS box is. More than likely, if it's either in the copy state, it's still copying data, or it's going to be, we're going to go in here, we're going to see it at a ready state for cutover. Now we are going over, this is a bulk migration to illustrate this process. There are other options for migrating via HCX, and those would normally be covered under the extended solutions architecture conversation. So in the time that we've been talking, my IIS box is sitting at 100%, and it's showing as waiting for the maintenance window. Without my manual intervention, it is waiting for August 30th. What HCX has done in the back end is it is copied the VMDKs, or in this case, one VMDK. It has gone in on the AVS side, and it has already created that on the vSAN. It has already created all of those resident pieces. One thing to underscore is that it doesn't show, here's our will test 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the VMs that we just successfully copied over a few minutes ago and cut over a few minutes ago. You're not going to see my IIS box because it is not officially a registered VM. HCX is not going, it's not going to allow you to see anything that it is in the midst of doing a cutover on until it is ready to register that virtual machine with the vCenter itself. But confirmation, we can go in here and we're going to go into files. This is IIS test. So we know it's there. Let's go ahead and let's go back and cut it over. And while it's doing the cutover, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of this. So I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to go to schedule. I'm just going to do ignore failover window. Again, I will say this is a Presidio preference of operation. This is not, please don't misconstrue with the way I'm doing things with the, I want to say industry accepted method, but quite honestly, everybody's kind of got their own method and approach to this. This is just what we have found to be the best mix of ensuring that things migrate when we want them to, and at the same time, ensuring that in the time period leading up to the migration that we are in a constant state of copy and synchronization for that data. So we're going to go apply. And it's going to switch over in a few minutes. Again, this can take anywhere. The quickest I've seen it take is 10 minutes, but on average, it's about 15 minutes, about 15 minutes or so, based off of the amount of data change. And there really isn't a lot of data change on this. Now, in a second, I'm going to show when I pull this, when it copies over, when it cuts over, I'm still going to be able to do this because it will have gone to the other pool. And if we look at our metrics, I want to see our backend pool status, which they may have changed. Yeah, it's not there anymore. Let's go. We're just going to skip that. So this is the application gateway. It wasn't really covered and talked about within the other slides on here, but that is an example of a method of modernization and optimization for the cloud. While this is what you connect into from a vCenter standpoint, this is what the AVS looks like at its core on the Azure portal. We need to have a /22, and that /22 is specifically for AVS management, and it is for the AVS itself. You cannot overlap with anything. And even though /22 is rather large, it doesn't give you any of the actual networks that you would use as places to put your virtual machines. So when you start talking about architecting an IP architecture for your Azure environment, you really need to start looking at large subnets. Generally for a solution that is, we'll say the Azure VMware Solution baseline that's got 3 subscriptions on it. From scratch, we would normally recommend a /19 per region that you want to exist in. And that is large enough to contain an AVS in that region, a multitude of either VNets or segments. And then on top of that, that also gives us the ability, if we need to do app gateway, or if we need to do some front door, if we need to do just about any kind of additional constructs within Azure as part of the project, it gives us a lot of freedom and flexibility. Because unfortunately, or fortunately, there are plenty, unlike the data center side, where I can go, I need to put in X solution within the rack. And the question becomes, well, how many IP addresses do you need? When it comes to the cloud, a lot of those conversations are, how much IP address space does the construct require? App Gateway requires at minimum its own /24 to be able to handle and scale out and scale in. Let's go check. I got a little bit of a hang. It's in switchover. And it's kind of hanging. That's good. That means well, my VM isn't quite there yet, but it will be. As soon as I stop. All right. There we go. My IIS test box has already been powered down. And as shown here, can't reach it. Let's even do this. And if I look here, my app gateway is going to say the same thing when it times out. Because right now there's nothing up. Right now HCX is doing its thing. From a migration standpoint, based off of your environment's architectures and needs, we can cut down on this, but quite honestly, this is intended to illustrate the process of HCX and show some of the behaviors, not necessarily to indicate this is how we do zero downtime migrations, although it is possible for us to do zero downtime migrations. And while it's doing that, I can go up here and I can look in my AVS. So it was said earlier, like these are your own hosts. This is not a multi-tenant environment. I've got 3 Dell EMC hosts. These are mine. Nobody else gets to use them. And they host obviously a multitude of different workloads and different things going on. Let's go down to, I'm not seeing, oh, there we go. Hey, look, there's my IIS box. It's started the registration in here. Granted, we still have a 504 gateway timeout, but that's okay. That's to be expected. We're kind of in that middle ground between migrating and living in one place and living in another. So let's go look at the status of the migration here. It's still going in switchover. An IIS test is powering on. So we've got this piece. There may be a slight issue with the network behavior, but we can fix that real quick. Let's go look and see what's going on. Still doing it. All right. We're going to give it a second. We're going to give it a little bit more time. Since HCX is still in the midst of doing the migration, more than likely we're waiting for one reboot. Yeah. I think VMware Tools was unable to upgrade the IP address on me. That's okay. We're going to pull this up real quick. Well, there's a whole list of checks and balances that we do leading up to these migrations to ensure that these kind of situations don't happen, or at least we minimize them. So I need to make sure that it has an IP address of 10, 1020, 10200. Check that piece, and then we're going to make sure that he is on the right zone lab infrastructure. There we go. And then let's do this. And there you go. There you have it. It's not quite as smooth as I wanted it to be on stage here, but long story short, we have successfully moved this IIS box into the Azure VMware Solution. It is sitting behind an app gateway and going into a vWAN hub. Any questions, guys? So we've got the lab show off. We did the cut over. I'm going to hand it over to Hussam, and he's going to talk about programs and updates related to AVS. What's on the horizon? What's coming soon? Thank you all very much for your attention on this and your patience at those times where things were a little slow.
Thank you so much, Will. This was a very exciting demo to really kind of see the things working. I mean, I guess lots of people would be interested to, understand how things work under the hood. So this was really nice and helpful for people to learn more about AVS and the migrations with the HCX. All right, so let's kind of move on and talk more about the latest AVS programs and updates. And with no further ado, let's jump in. So let's kind of proceed with the slide, please.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the VMware Rapid Migration Plan. This is basically a set of benefits that you get when you try to purchase Azure VMware Solution. The first thing I want to talk about is the price protection. So it's not only price protection, by the way, it's also a saving, right? So with AVS, now we have 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year reserved instances that would also give discounts if you lock the price for this period of time. The 5 years actually is an offer that ends by the end of this calendar year. but it's kind of a guarantee that if you purchase AVS today and you lock it for 5 years, the prices would never change on the nodes that you just purchased from Microsoft. In addition to that, we have additional 20% off on the 1-year reserved instance. That's not the base discount, that's the additional discount. So if you sum both the discount over the discounted price, it would be around like 43% for the 1-year reserved instance. This is really helpful for people like once you do like a migration for like a limited amount of time on AVS, and then maybe consider maybe modernization with other Azure services as a long term. So this is really good again. And then the other discounts that or other savings that the customer can have with AVS is saving on licenses, right? So today, if you have Windows and SQL licenses through software assurance, you can bring those into Azure VMware Solution without losing or without the need of repurchasing those licenses. So you just basically reuse your investment with those licenses. On top of that, AVS is very unique when it comes to free extended security updates. That is if you have a Windows Server 2012 or SQL 2012, and now actually SQL 2014 because it kind of reached its end of life in last July. So with those, you can get free extended security updates for 3 years. That's only unique in Azure. That's only unique with Azure VMware Solution. So even when you do your TCOs, you need to consider this amount of money that you can be saving or getting this for free eventually if you just kind of move into Azure VMware Solution. Also, we have other programs for customers that like Azure Migrate and Modernize program, which in this case kind of the customer gets funding to start their migration project with the partners like Presidio here to start doing the migration for AVS or from on-premises to AVS. The amount of money that the customer, or the funding that the customer would receive depending basically on the size of the project. And then if the customer is a Microsoft managed account, and if you're that customer, you may receive now up to 120,000 of incentives if you migrate to AVS with a reserved instance. This is also available until the end of this year. And the amount of money you get is also depending on the amount of nodes. So the minimal is 6 nodes. But if you get more, you get up to $120,000 of Azure incentives. This is basically like a gift card that you get to spend on Azure if you do this migrations. Right, let's move on and talk about one more exciting thing actually. Here is the ability of license portability for VMware Cloud Foundation. So if you're a VMware customer today, and if you're ready, purchased VMware Cloud Foundation after the Broadcom acquisition, you might be kind of locked in the terms that you need to stay on using VCF for a certain amount of time. We just announced last month that we're gonna eventually make this a transactable on AVS. It's not today, but it's coming soon. That we will make those licenses for VCF portable to AVS. So what that really means, from an AVS perspective, no big changes because that's still like AVS will still be like a managed service. Like it's not like VCF going to change anything with how we present AVS. The same VMware tech stack, it actually eventually will be enabling VCF stack on AVS. So for things like ARIA and other tools, that they will be eventually be available on AVS. The AVS pricing, the difference is we're going to have the existing SKUs, and then we're going to have slightly new SKUs that will be slightly on a lower price that only available when you bring your VCF licenses with you. The support still comes from Microsoft, and if you go with license portability, the purchasing will be kind of between Microsoft and VMware because you start with VCF and then eventually you pay for the nodes that you purchase from Microsoft. So Microsoft will still kind of host the nodes and maintain them, and all the infrastructure work that we had to do to make the service running under our SLAs. So this is coming. Stay tuned when this becomes transactable. But if you're today having VCF licenses and you're looking forward to migrating into AVS, you just rest assured that this will become possible to you without losing your investments in VCF. Okay, let's go to the next slides and talk more about latest kind of products innovations and feature released. So last year we added like 10 regions to AVS portfolio across the globe. So this is keeps growing as we go with time. And also we introduced the AV64. I think, Madeline actually covered that in the previous slide, but AV64 is a new kind of SKU for AVS running on Azure Fleet hardware. It's a scalable, it's a new SKU, and it's basically how we encourage customers today to expand their clusters. It's like start a cluster with AV36P, for example. That's kind of the initial cluster of the 3 nodes. And if you need more capacity, add more of the AV64 clusters next to it. And this actually will be your future-proof AVS environment. We also added offerings like pure Cloud Block storage for AVS. We added the Cloud Director services for AVS that's also supported today and ready for enterprise consumption. We have, I think in the question someone asked about, can I use Key Vault? I mean, yes, if you use customer managed keys to protect the vSAN encryption key, then yes, you can use customer managed keys to encrypt that key. And if you have any kind of VDI workloads running on AVS, we now support the virtual TPM on AVS. So if you have Windows 11 that requires TPMs, that also now is working if you run into that blocker as in the past. That's not a blocker anymore. Also, we have introduced the well-architected assessment tool for AVS. So you can, after you provision your AVS environment using the best practices from Cloud Adoption Framework and using Landing Zone, you run this assessment to basically make sure your environment is tuned in the best way it can be for running your workloads in Azure VMware Solution. We also, in the past, introduced the Trust clusters for AVS available in limited regions. And also, if you're a customer in the Gov space, we have 2 regions supporting AVS with FedRAMP High in Azure Government, which is the one in Virginia, one in Arizona. Also, if you're looking for storage expansion in those government regions, we also have Azure NetApp Files in those regions as well. I think, Guillermo also talked about the storage options. So Elastic SAN now is in public preview. Hopefully it's going to be generally available soon. That's another storage options for your, as a data store you can attach to AVS. And then if you're using Azure Migrate to do AVS assessment, now we have the ability to import RV Tools spreadsheet as is. So in the past, that wasn't an option. You have to kind of use the template that Azure Migrate understands. But now you can, if you just have the RV Tools export from your environment, you can import it in the Azure Migrate assessment, and that will tell you, for example, how many nodes you need to provision ahead of time, and give you an understanding how much the costing would be per VM and things like that. So it's good, estimation tool that you can use to get an idea of how much it's going to cost you when you migrate your VMs to Azure VMware Solution. Last thing, if you're looking to adding more kind of integration with Azure management plane and kind of manage your VMs in AVS as first class Azure VMs, you can Arc enable your vSphere and do that. You can do basically operations like start and stop for those VMs. You can provision them using bicep templates. You can resize them if you want to add more CPU capacity and memory capacity. All that from the Azure APIs. Only if you Arc enable those VMs. Okay, let's go move to the next slide, please. So this is just kind of a quick slide to show you how many regions today we cover with AVS. So in Azure, we have 60+ regions across the globe, and now we have more than 33 regions with AVS enabled, as you can see on this screen. So, and if you want to, always stay up to date, always go to aka.ms AVS regions. That's where you can see all the latest regions that have AVS in them. All right. All right. Let's talk about this customer success story. It's actually very close to my heart. I live in DC area, and this is kind of really the metro that I use. So whenever I see this success story, I really kind of feel happy and proud. The Presidio were able to work with the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority to basically perform an AVS migration project with them. So like within a 6-month thing, they were able to migrate 10 mission critical applications to AVS with no interruptions. These actually the services that kind of run the fare collection when you go into the station and scan your badge or scan your ticket, or scan your phone. These are the mission critical applications that were migrated into Azure with no interruptions, and you can see there the customer was really happy with the the service that Presidio provided, and also with Azure VMware Solution as a service in Azure that allows them to migrate some of their workloads into the cloud and open the window for them to modernize with other services that we also have in the Microsoft and Azure portfolio in the cloud. So, and if you want to read the full story, eventually we have a link. And with that, I would hand it over to, I think, Will and McKenna for handling this. But I'm happy here to take your questions as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to come and put them in the chat so we can help you answer your questions.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see, we do have some questions that I did see come through the chat. I will just ask aloud for all of the speakers. So the first one is there a way that I can have an extended period of time to lock in my AVS cost?
Yes, so I can maybe take this question. Yes, you can. That's what we kind of talked about in the previous slide, is kind of through the Azure reserved instances that you get a discount if you lock your commitment with Microsoft with 1 year, 3 year, or even 5 years. And that will give you like a price protection for a longer period of time. So you get the discount and you get the price protection. No changes would affect you if ever changes happen.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then the other one I saw come through was, can I perform zero downtime migration for my workloads?
Yes.
Go ahead, Will. Yeah, take it, please.
Yes, HCX does have the ability to do a zero downtime migration. It's slightly different than a bulk migration, but that is possible.
Okay, great.
Cool.
And then lastly here, can I use savings plans or reserved instances with AVS?
You can definitely use reserved instances. Honestly, that's the preferred route we tell a lot of people. Some of it depends on what the objective you're trying to meet with leveraging AVS and going to the cloud. If you're trying to evacuate out of a data center and you don't anticipate doing a very immediate modernization of your applications, then it may be more prudent for you to get a 3-year or a 5-year reservation based off of where you see your modernization efforts in your own company's timeline. And I called that out in comparison to, you know what, we want to get a presence in Azure. We also want to be in a better place to just start modernizing immediately. So maybe you'll only need like a 1-year reservation, or maybe you need a mix. It really comes down to the objectives that you're trying to meet from both a cost standpoint and an operational long-term operational standpoint.
Okay, great. That makes sense. Thanks, Will, and thanks, Hussam. I know we're just a couple minutes over, so we'll go to the next slide, please. But if you have any other questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, we're going to share an email alias. You can follow up directly and get the answer directly from our speakers. So with that, we'll wrap it up here. So you all may be asking, what's next? If you have any questions for our speakers and would like to connect with Presidio to get started or request a solution assessment, please reach out to the email alias on this screen. Additionally, you can connect with us on social media. And along with the recording that we send out, we will also be sending a link to our Microsoft Azure VMware Solution one-pager, which is also available on presidio.com. So thank you all again for your time today and for the great questions that you asked throughout the presentation. And big thank you to all of our speakers today, Madeline, Guillermo, Will, and Hussam, for an interactive and informative presentation. So we are looking forward to hopefully seeing you all at the next Presidio and Microsoft webinar that we have. With that, enjoy your coffee and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day.
Thank you. Y'all have a great day.